Hi guys, back again. We are in Romans chapter 3, looking at verses 21 to 31 today. And I titled this one, How to Be Righteous Without Being Perfect, because we know none of us are, right? So just to recap a little bit, Paul has just explained in the previous verses and a couple chapters that he just explained what the purpose of the law was. He told them that God's law is a teacher and it shows us our guilt before God. He said the law stops the mouth because when we compare our actions, every single one of us compares our actions against the law, no one is righteous. So no one is justified by keeping the law because, well, we don't, right? We may try and we should try, but none of us is perfect. None of us is righteous, and we have all broken God's laws on many accounts. So it's hard to get through the day without breaking one or more of God's laws, right? So his whole point was that we have no excuse to judge other people because we're all equally guilty, maybe not of the same types of sin, but we're all equally guilty before a holy God. Everyone has broken the law. So moving into Romans 3:21 through 31, Paul helps us reconcile the hard reality that he has just explained. Paul begins in verse 21 with, but now. And this is exciting for me because it just kind of comes alive at this point. Paul says, but now, we're not thinking about the law and how guilty we are anymore, because now, don't worry, kids, there's more. Yes, you're guilty. No, you're not righteous. But guess what? There's something else. What is it? Listen to the verse. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. And it goes on. So that's good news, right? There's a different kind of righteousness. It's not the one you get by being perfect and never breaking any laws, because if it were that one, none of us would be eligible, right? It's a good thing. So, but this righteousness shows up apart from the law. It's the righteousness of God through faith. Faith in what? Faith in Jesus Christ for everyone who believes. So Paul says every person that has ever been made righteous before God has only done it this way, through faith. Not through works, through faith in Jesus. And the only way to be justified by God's grace is to get this as a gift. You don't work for it. You can't work for it. We don't deserve it. We don't earn it. You can't buy this bail money, right? He's got to give it to you. So Jesus paid for our lawless errors with his perfect life. And he's the only one who could, because he's the only one who kept the law perfectly in its totality. So his death, his perfect life, his death was given as a ransom for our freedom. We're redeemed by faith because he alone kept the law. So Christ's sacrifice of himself appeased the Father because the Father is a just judge. Paul tells us the purpose of this whole plan in Romans 2:25. Is it 2:25 or 3:25? Sorry, guys. 3:25. Sorry. Had a typo. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So this whole thing is about putting God's righteousness on display. That's what Paul says here. What does he mean about being just and the justifier of those who have faith in Jesus, though? So This would be like a judge convicting a criminal in his courtroom and sentencing him to pay a fine, maybe, and then paying the fine for the criminal himself, the judge paying the fine. So God is just. He couldn't just pass over the sin anymore that he did in his long suffering and his forbearance. He overlooked some of these things, but he couldn't just do that. There had to be a penalty paid. A good judge can't declare a guilty man innocent, and God is a good and just judge. So our conviction, our guilt was placed upon his son, and his perfect life, his sacrifice of death of his perfect life, satisfied God's justice, and that's the only thing that can. So then Paul says, where is boasting, right? Could that guilty criminal who had his fine paid, his punishment paid by the judge who gave him that sentence, can he brag about his goodness afterward? Certainly not. Clearly not, right? He could only point to the mercy of the judge, and that's where we're all at in this whole conundrum here. Paul says, what of boasting? Not only is no one righteous, so we can't boast there, neither can anyone point to his own works and credit himself with his own salvation. We don't become righteous before God by being perfect or by doing works. The only way we become righteous before God is by faith in the one who was righteous before God, which is Jesus. So Romans 3:28 reads this way: for we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law. So we're justified by faith, not by works. So finally, Paul proves beyond a shadow of a doubt there is no Jew or Gentile distinction in God's plan of salvation. This is important because this is the reason I started this study, remember? The Jews and the Gentiles and who's the promise for, right? When God says, I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. We have a lot of misunderstanding going around in Christian circles about that promise of God back in Genesis. So here we come back to the Jews and the Gentiles. Paul says there's no distinction. God's plan of salvation is the same for everyone, okay? There is no second plan for Jews. So he asks his readers, is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not God of the Gentiles too? Remember, there's Jews and Gentiles in the Roman church, so he's got to reconcile this. So yes, he's God of the Gentiles and the Jews, both of them. And since God is one, and his plan is one for everyone, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised by faith. So in other words, guess what, guys? No one is righteous. No one has any right to judge anyone else. Circumcision was only meant as a symbol of a regenerate heart. We already did all of those studies in the past few chapters. So the true Jews are those who follow God in their heart, not people from a Middle Eastern nation or those of a certain nationality or bloodline. That's not who the true Jews are. They're the people who follow God and live for him in their heart. So everybody, both Jews and Gentiles, which is everybody in the world, you're either a Jew or you're not a Jew, both become righteous before God in the same way. It's not through works, it's through faith. Both the Jew and the Gentile must believe in Jesus Christ in order to be righteous in the eyes of God. That's what Paul says. So that's huge. That's all of it right there. There's only one way being taught in the Bible. There's not one way for Jews and another way for Gentiles. Paul says, no, God is one. And the one way to righteousness is through faith. So what then? He knows they're about to ask, do we just throw the law away then? Because that's, essentially what he gave the Jews in the beginning, right? Do we just get rid of it? We don't need it anymore because obviously we don't keep it that well anyway. So who needs the 10 Commandments? We're free in Christ, right? Jesus paid it all. Well, that's all true. But Paul says, no way. Nice try, guys. We uphold the law. Just because we're justified by faith does not give us a reason to stop trying to obey the law. Paul says it's all the more reason to obey the law in as much as we can as humans. No one's going to be justified by keeping the law, but that's not why we want to. Our desire to work toward keeping God's law is a natural outflow of genuine faith. One who has been forgiven much loves much. So our debt was paid by Jesus Christ, but we are now ever indebted to him on the basis of our love for him and our thankfulness to him for what he has done for us. So therefore, we look at his law and we strive to live by it, no matter how imperfectly. So that's today's lesson. Next, we're going to look into Romans 4 at Abraham's faith and see who exactly were these descendants that God was talking about when he gave the promise of the blessing to those who bless them and curse those who curse them. Who was he talking about? Was he talking about a country in the Middle East? Was he talking about Israel? Or was he talking about someone else? Because it's really, really clear here. So read Romans 4. You can get ahead and read it before we study it. But it's really fun. This is a fun study. So I hope you like it, and I hope that's helpful. Have a good night.